to the Patriot Pod. Today's special guest, this is going to be a good one. I encourage everyone to really listen to this one. There's a lot of experience. There's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of actionable things that I think everyone in the audience is going to be able to relate to, if not be able to use in their own military careers or in their retired military careers, whether you're a spouse, whether you're a DoD civilian, whether you're an active duty service member. I think this is going to pertain to everyone. So please make sure to check out the show notes. And if you decide that you like this episode, go ahead and click on that like button. Send us a like. Let us know that we're doing some good things. Also, we've got a lot of fresh content always coming out. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. But today we have, like I said, an amazing guest who's actually a good friend of ours. He has offered his services to a very dear friend of mine personally. And for that, I'm truly grateful. But I'm very excited. We are very excited for this episode. So in order to introduce the man, the myth, the legend that is Alexander Roig, I want to send it over to my beautiful co-host here to shout out the bio.
Yes, thank you, Alex, for coming on. Alex Roig. So he comes to us from the law offices of Alexander Roig. Great name there, great title. Makes it easy for people like us to understand, right? And He also graduated from UT Austin, which we also love, Texas boy. He graduated from Thomas Cooley University in Lansing, Michigan, where he got his law degree. And he's been a VA claims attorney for 20 years now. So he generally practices in estate planning, trust, probate. And you know how we normally here on the Patriot Pod hear from other veterans and, from their experiences and several, other avenues of entrepreneurship. What we're going to hear about today from Alex is kind of a departure from that. Alex does come from a line of family veterans in his family. And through the last 20 years, as a VA claims attorney, has gotten to work closely with lots of soldiers, retired, even, older veterans that we don't really hear about a lot, and just a ton of experience on how you can really maximize your benefits and some of the things that you could take advantage of when you get out of the military, whether you retire or you simply ETS out of the military. Alex has really seen it all. So we're excited to talk to him and just learn from some of that wisdom and see what you have to offer, Alex. So we're glad to have you here. So yeah, we'll toss it back over to you.
And thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're always, as another reinforcement, if you will, of why we're here and why we're doing this. Amber and I come from the military service. Like I was Army, Amber was Army, and this is not about us. Don't get me wrong. This is not about us. I want the audience to understand that this podcast is specifically geared towards those soldiers that may not know where to look. And if they do know where to look, they perhaps, like in my case, when I went to the Army Community Services and had to get financial help as a young service member, I was typically and perpetually met with civilians that have certifications, that have a great deal of goodwill and who are good people. But when it comes to, understanding a soldier's situation, really being able to speak from their own experience, a lot of the civilians, and I'm not saying this against you, Alex, by any means, but this podcast is meant for those soldiers to hear from a perspective of retired service members. And actually, Amber is still active duty. She doesn't retire until March of 2024. So for soldiers that are out there, whether you're Air Force, Marines, Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Space Force, whatever it is, I want you to know, if you're listening to us now, I want you to know that we've been there. I've had to get financial help. I've had to ask for help for all different types of things. So I want you to know that we're here. We are trying to reach you, and we're trying to let you know that every single guest that we bring on, and in particular, Alex, who's a great resource, we're here to help you. This is all we're trying to do. We're on the tail end of our military careers. And what we're trying to find a unique way to do is to give back to the active duty service members, DoD civilians, and their family members, because it matters. We don't want to let, freedom isn't free. So we want to continue that trend of paying it forward to those service members. And I want to make that known. I want to always sort of emphasize that at the start of every episode. So with that being said, as everyone knows, military folks, we have a hard job. And it's very typical that after a long week of training or whatever it is that you're doing, whether that's IT or intelligence or field artillery or whatever it is, even JAG has a crazy job, right? So at the end of a very hard week, what does everybody typically like to do? We, as everyone, like to enjoy a nice cold beverage. So what I would like to do is introduce mine. I am drinking a tried and true. This was the very first episode. I was drinking a Shiner Bock Tex Hex. It's a hazy IPA, my favorite. Amber, what are you drinking?
Don't laugh at me, but I'm drinking a Truly
Oh,
margarita.
you
Classic
said not to
time.
laugh. Okay, sorry.
Look, I'm retiring. I gotta count my calories now, or I'm just gonna be going crazy.
With that new ACFT, right?
Yeah, I'm no longer required
Alex,
to go to PT at 6:00.
I saw that Gaston flag on your cup. What are you drinking
Hey.
inside of there?
Well, I'm going to let the audience guess. I will tell you there's one large ice cube inside of it, and that's about all I'm going to reveal to you.
Ooh, is that a single ice cube from like a tray, or is that a sphere ice cube, as in craft ice?
It's a very large cube. It comes in a special silicone tray.
Oh, a fancy man, I see. I
Yes.
like that. I respect
Yes.
that, actually.
Yes,
I
indeed.
respect that. That leaves a lot to the imagination. But so now that that's out of the way, and by the way, I am really trying to get Shiner to sponsor our podcast. That's ultimate goal, is to have their brand on this episode. So if there's anybody out there that's listening that works for Shiner, hit me up.
Yeah.
So let's get down into the meat and potatoes. I want to get all of the festivities out of the way. I want to get down to the meat and potatoes. So as it relates to you and your practice, what made you? Was it family that you mentioned you have military service members in your family?
Yes.
Was it those folks that drove you to start practice as it relates to the VA? Or kind of share with us, what was your mindset around starting
Sure.
that practice?
Sure, and it was sort of a combination of everything, if you will. I've been practicing 20 years. Most of my focus centers on estate planning, trust, probate work. But you can't practice in San Antonio and not be representing veterans. And so I've worked with so many attorneys that were either former JAG or reserve JAGs and whatnot. And while they were doing divorces and dealing with DFAS and different survivor benefits, we noticed nobody was doing estate planning. And nobody was saying, hey, this is something specific for veterans, and how do we set the veteran up for success later in life to maximize not only the avoidance of probate, but also to capture as much VA benefits as possible. And that's where, certainly in the last decade, we started doing that. And my father was in the Army. He was stationed here at Fort Sam. And that's sort of what kind of, between that and working with the JAGs, that kind of guided me in that path. So
That's great. So in your experience as it relates to San Antonio, and this is not just for the San Antonio market, I think anybody around the United States that wants to ask specific probate or litigation or VA questions, feel free to reach out to Alex. That's the beauty of podcasting, is we get to reach a large audience, which I love, and I want to provide this platform to get your name out there so people can ask you those questions.
please.
But when it comes to our specific neck of the woods, if you will, in San Antonio, what would you say in your experience is the demographic of folks that are retired that have not put in a VA claim or otherwise, and are later in life that never really considered? Why do you think it is that those folks never really did that?
That's like a whammy of questions right there. I would say it surprises me the number of veterans 65 and up that they did their service, whether it was Vietnam, the Korean War. Not a whole lot of World War II folks left, but that they did their service and then they left. They never followed up. In particular, with the Vietnam veterans, um, with Agent Orange, things of that nature, that exposure, and they have a lot of the symptoms and a lot of the diseases, but they never followed up uh, with the VA. And there's a somewhat of a strange mindset that I didn't file the claim because I didn't want to take from somebody else, and
Yeah.
they missed the whole point, which is that's a myth. Either you're eligible for the claim or you're not. The government prints the money, right? So if you're eligible
That's
and
good
it's
advice.
approved, you got it. And so don't be thinking of things as to I'm taking away from some other soldier. Don't or
Yeah.
veteran. Don't ever think like that.
But why is that? So, I was forced with that same exact question before I submitted my BDD, which is benefits during discharge VA claim. What are the specific things that you can perhaps help folks to understand? Like, what is it is what is out there that would make it worth their while to go through the hassle, to open up Pandora's box, to share their innermost demons, if you will, or those sort of horrific experiences that all soldiers deal with, frankly. What can you share with us as far as your experience that most people look at a VA claim and they're like, it's not worth my while. I don't want to do
Yep.
that. I don't want to bare my soul to somebody. But what would you say to somebody like that?
I would tell you to just stop and zoom out 30,000 feet and look down and understand what is your relationship with the VA. And the answer is it's forever. You've served the country. So long as there's air in your lungs, you have a relationship with the VA. And so your strategy and your plan of action, if you will, is you have to have a marathon mentality. You can't have this sprint. I just want to make a claim, and if it doesn't happen, I'm done. You have to say this is a long, drawn out. It's going to take a while.
Yeah.
And when you have that mindset as to this is I think the term is an infinity strategy, right? We're going to be doing this as long as I'm alive. You
Yeah.
take that approach, and you will have how do I say, you'll have a better success, a mindset for success, if that makes any sense. Um,
Absolutely. And when it comes to a lot of things, what I think soldiers, and maybe you can touch on this because you've seen it more than I have. There are some things that a soldier may claim that gets rated at 0%, right?
right.
But I think that there might be a misconception out there with soldiers that realize even though a particular ailment may be rated at 0%, it's still in the records.
Right.
It's still able. You can interface with the VA and you can still receive health care for those particular ailments, even though the VA rates them at 0%. Is that true or not
Yeah.
true in your experience?
Well, and remember, all of these things. We all remember Legos as a kid, right? So all these things are building blocks for your long-term plan.
Yeah.
They when I've done work with other VA groups, for example, that they help veterans, they fill out these applications for a claim for disability. And I'll see that they put like literally the kitchen sink, every ache, every problem you can imagine. They do this laundry list and they create this 4-inch binder. Okay. But at the end of the day, when you turn that binder in, all systems, all governments, all institutions, all courts are run by people. So if you put a 4-inch stack on a person's desk and say, I want you to review this, and they get into your claim ailment number 3, and they say, hey, you know what? There's not really a nexus here between the medical records and what you're claiming. The person doesn't have to read the rest of your file. They can stop right there and say, okay, it's all denied. And
Wow.
even though you have 10 claims on there and 9 are substantiated, because one wasn't a complete record or whatever, it's denied. And so, like, my firm takes a different approach. And while I'm not an expert in this, I can tell you that our approach is we treat it like a marathon, and we're going to
Yep.
start with one claim at a time. And we're going to, so where you have tinnitus, for example. Well, they can't deny a claim for tinnitus. So we get that foot in the door. So that's building block number 1. Then we move on to, hey, you have eczema that's not been in your family and whatnot. You were exposed to whatever chemicals, or you have chronic respiratory issues, which with the PACT Act now you're around burn pits, and it's presumed if you were in Iraq, if you were in Djibouti, if you were in Afghanistan, these are presumed now. So now we can start creating those building blocks as to who you are and get your disability.
Wow. That's great news.
Yeah.
So could you just really quick, what does it mean for those soldiers that may not have any interaction with the VA? What is a presumptive ailment? What does it mean to be presumed?
Sure. So if you were served in Iraq since 9/11, for example, there's a presumption that you were exposed to burn pits.
Okay.
And so if you after a 9/11, and like, for example, if you were served after 9/11 but you were discharged before October 2013, you've got a little over 30 days, okay, by the way, to file a PACT Act claim, or at least an intent to file a claim. And you can log onto the webpage, the form is there, they'll guide you through the process. But at least get that claim in. And so long as you were in Iraq and you have a chronic respiratory illness, there are certain cancers that are linked to this. And so, in other words, if it's presumed, it means you have it. It means that you're eligible for some sort of compensation.
Okay. That makes sense. And that's but Amber, do you have a question? I know you are specifically getting ready to within the next 6 months you have to submit your claim.
Right.
After a full 20-year career, as you went from enlisted to commissioned officer, you are getting ready to step into this. So this is invaluable knowledge for not only you, but for everybody that's listening to this podcast. So do you have a question you wanted to?
Yeah, this is great. And what you were saying earlier, that you're surprised about how many people leave the military and don't file a claim or just don't know what they're eligible for. Honestly, like, we didn't even know what some of these words meant and what the VA process was until just a couple years ago. And Steven started doing his. And so I hear you mention Nexus event, right? And that triggers me because I remember that going through Steven's claim. But for a soldier who's in the military right now and who just hasn't thought about it, what kind of advice would you give them to help them prepare wherever they are in their career?
Yeah.
You've seen a lot of mistakes being made. You've had to go backwards in the fight to get those resources to those folks. So what
Right.
kind of advice would you give to currently serving soldiers to help them when they get to that point?
So number 1 is make sure it's in your military file. Okay, so always make sure if you have a medical ailment, any type of event. I don't care if you were not on active duty, but you were coming back from a restaurant and you were in an auto accident. That's still an accident that happened while on duty, or while serving, I should say. And so you need to make sure that's all documented. All right, make sure it's in your official military file. And the other thing I would say is, while you are transitioning out, so your last year or whatever, it's not just a question of getting your DD 214. Okay, you also need to get there's a form called SF 180, I think, SF 180, and that's your official military file. Okay, because when you come to me, whether it's a year later or 20 years later, and you come to a VA, hey, I need to make a claim. As your advocate, I have to be able to tell your story. And it's not just a question of, I see you were honorably discharged. It's got to be a question of, well, where all were your duty stations? What were your orders? What are your performance records? What's your medical records? What were your awards? I need to be able to develop who you are, because I'm going to be your voice when it comes time to make that claim. It takes forever to get those records. So the best thing you can do is, when you first get out, fill out all those applications. You can start now, okay?
Yep.
And create a file, because you're going to need it later. And if not you, your family may need it later. Your wife, your children may need it later, okay? Because you may not have a capacity. You may be hit on the head. You may be in a coma. And now you can't tell us your story, but at least we have your records to begin that process to help out the family. So,
Right.
And that is great advice. But as we get into the realm of talking actionable steps, I do want to make it known for everybody listening to this. Alex is a lawyer who deals with a lot of different intricacies as it relates to military service and otherwise. So please, for everyone listening to this entire episode is for general information purposes only. This episode does not constitute strict legal advice. I want to make that known. I want everybody to be informed, and I want everyone that's listening to this podcast to understand the battle space that they're getting ready to walk into and operate in. The VA is essentially, and maybe Alex, you can describe this because I didn't know this, but the VA is a triple-headed monster. There is a health benefits side. There is a actual, like, the Veterans Benefits Association, VBA. There's a pay and benefits side, and then there's also another side that I don't even know what it is. So I want everybody to know that's listening to this podcast. I want you to start thinking about that, because you're not just interfacing with one person that knows and can speak all the different branches, I'll call them, of the VA. It is a very intricate process. You got to know and be able to take notes and keep track, perhaps a Rolodex, if you will, of the different people that you talk to as you go through the VA claim and as you move forward, because a lot of those folks are going to be able to answer some questions for you on the back end. Alex and his law firm are going to help you, before, during, and after as well. But in order for you to interface, because with me, I like to just pick up the phone and make a call. I want to reach out to whoever it is that told me this specific thing and say, hey, that was right or that wasn't right. Can you explain a little bit more? So can you kind of touch on that, Alex, and help folks understand and frame the VA, as you've experienced it?
so if the government's a headache, the VA is a migraine. Okay. And I would say this, that even the VA doesn't understand the VA. Okay.
Yeah.
You could ask, and remember, you're dealing with bureaucracy, right? So they're all bureaucrats. And you could ask 10 different VA claims adjusters and you'll get 10 different answers, right? Same thing with lawyers. You ask them 10 different lawyers, you'll get 10 different answers. But the best thing you can do is arm yourself with your complete record and find an advocate that understands this process. I don't do this alone. I hire other veterans to help me navigate specific issues. And so I help build a team to help guide my team, my clients through this process. And that team changes based upon, hey, what is the veteran's need, so to speak. And the other thing to remember, like I said, now we said this all along, this is a long process. We all have the instant gratification from our cell phones or from the computers, but not when it comes to government. This is a long process. And you have the Constitution to do that. Okay. But I would say, just don't remember, the hardest part about this is getting a disability established in the first place. That's your foot in the door. And it's not that the VA doesn't want to help. It's just that they're not going to volunteer anything. You have to go through that process. And like you were saying, there's the disability side, but there's also, veterans pension side. And so you have to, and there's all these boxes you have to qualify for. And if you meet veterans pensions, then maybe or veterans pension, then maybe you're eligible for what's called aid and attendance, or if, and we can go into that later, but also DIC, dependent indemnity compensation. And so that deals with a veteran who has passed away, and perhaps they have but their death is either while on duty or is the result of a disability, an injury that they received while on duty. And so if you can establish that nexus, then their spouse, their child, or whatever would be eligible for certain benefits.
Isn't that a beautiful thing?
And when
I
you
think a
say
lot of
nexus, I just wanted to clarify. When you say nexus, you mean an actual event that created the disability, right? Is that kind of a
Right.
explanation
So
of that?
so if you were in artillery, right, and so it's kind of loud, you should probably have some hearing issues, right? There'd be a nexus between why you have a hearing problem, or you were on the flight line, right? There's going to be a nexus to why you had a hearing problem. Same thing, you have chronic sinus problems, skin problems, breathing, respiratory problems, and you were in Iraq during the certain time period. Well, that's now considered part of the PACT Act, right? And so that's the nexus. We have to have a connection. It's not just you had a broken arm. Well, what was the event that helped that broken arm? Was it during the service? When did it happen? That type of a deal. There
Now,
has to be a
Alex,
connection.
so I think another misconception with soldiers is that to be considered a veteran, you had to have deployed. And especially since we're coming out of the Afghanistan, Iraq wartime, as myself and Stephen served during, we were seeing a lot more soldiers that just haven't deployed. And I think that there's a misconception that you have to deploy to even be a veteran. I've heard people say that. So do
Yep.
I have had to deploy and have that connected to a deployment to get a disability from the VA?
No, you. That's a phenomenal question. What you just said. So if you were, let's see, if you're going to, in order to qualify, you got to have certain veterans pension qualifications. Okay, so one of them is if you're in service after September 1980, for example, you have to have served at least 24 months active duty and at least 1 day during a time of war. Here's the thing about America. Most of our 240-year history, we've been in a stage of war of some kind.
Yep.
Okay, and in the VA, there's a whole list of here are the years of service and whatnot that you can qualify for. And pretty much, if you've been in service, you were served since Vietnam, there's pretty good, you've been in a time of some stage of war or conflict, okay, that's going to qualify. That in mind, you don't actually have to have been deployed overseas to an active combat zone, for example, to be to qualify for benefits. And I give an example. I had a veteran. During the time of Vietnam, he never left the United States. Okay, he was in the Air Force, and his job was to clean out aircraft. Well, these aircraft later determined were carrying Agent Orange. So here was a veteran who
Wow.
never went to Vietnam, but he was cleaning out aircraft that was carrying Agent Orange. And of course, he had all the symptoms of all the exposure. And this was somewhat of a complexity because how do we say, what is the nexus, right? What is the connection between him having Agent Orange exposure and never being in Vietnam? And so we had to go through, well, where were you stationed? What did you do? And once we were able to establish that, then he was good to go.
That's incredible. I love the fact that you're able to help folks out like that.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, just to kind of foot stomp the fact that we're in San Antonio, and you mentioned that you decided to establish your practice in San Antonio, and before we kind of switch gears, because we've I would say perhaps beat the VA to death. There's many more days worth of conversation that we could have about the VA. What I want to do is, for those intricate questions that soldiers might have, DoD civilians, retirees, otherwise, how are people supposed to get in touch with you if they have some questions that they want to ask you, but that we haven't covered up until this point?
Sure. So go to my webpage. It's roiglaw.com, roiglaw.com. And there you have my email, my direct connection to the office, and we can set up a phone conference. There's no charge for a consultation, so we're happy to help. And if anything, at least guide you to the right webpage to go process a claim or something. Okay.
Yep. And also, this still kind of touches on the VA, but you mentioned the team aspect. And when I think of, if I'm going to do something, and as a retiree, every operation that we were preparing for, whether that was a deployment or just a simple JRTC rotation, whatever it was, we had to know the battle space that we were in, and we also had to bring the right resources and logistics. Obviously, can sustain operations for a long time. We can outlast the enemy. So, as it relates to the resources that you're able to insulate a particular soldier or DoD civilian or retiree with, that sort of team concept that you mentioned a minute ago.
Yeah.
What are the resources that you can insulate a claim with, whether that's yourself as the lawyer, a fellow service member that went through the same thing? Like, what are those specific resources that you bring along to each individual?
Sure. So when we're evaluating a soldier or a veteran's claim, for example, and let's take we have an elderly couple. He's a Vietnam veterans, and we're trying to rearrange their estate to help them qualify for what's called aid and attendance. Okay. So I would bring on. Okay, we have certain caps, for example, in order to qualify for aid and attendance, if your service was before 1980, you have to have served at least 90 days active duty and 1 day during a time of war. So we check the box for Vietnam, not a problem. But then you have to have. Then we start looking at net worth. Okay, so you have to have an annual net income of below $150,000. It does not count your house. But if your house is greater than 2 acres, then those extra acres are counted in. So there's all these different ways and means that the VA has. And so when I look at that, I would bring on with them. I want them to talk to a financial planner. How do we deal with their finances? I want them to talk
Nice.
to a VA advocate, for example. I have a Medicaid advocate or Medicaid Medicare advocate. I also have a VA liaison that I work with, and so we kind of help. You talk about building the battle space, for example. When you know, okay, this is what we're going to encounter. What is the objective of the veteran? We want to get them an extra $1,000 a month or whatever it is. Okay, well, how do we accomplish that? And one of the things is, well, what is your current rating? With the VA, can we bump that up? If we can't bump that up, well, is there another source that we can get to help fund these people so they're not depleting their entire life savings for a nursing home? Okay, we can get them some extra assistance, and the best thing for the elderly is to be in their own home, right? That's what they know.
Yeah.
And when you move them to nursing home, it's harder for them. They're not around necessarily the comforts of what they've lived for 20, 30 years at. And so providing this extra assistance can help them stay in their home longer. That prolongs their life longer, that mental health, if you will.
Absolutely. That's a huge thing. And Amber, I'm sure my mind immediately goes to your dad as things were happening in that situation, which we won't necessarily get into. But the reason I asked that question, Alex, is you not only do you specifically deal with and liaise with VA claims, the VA itself, you also offer through your practice. You said you also do probate and you
Yes.
do trust.
Yes.
And you mentioned it a minute ago, which I think is a really important aspect of a soldier's life, either before, during, or after their military service, and also as it relates to DoD civilians. And truly, frankly, everybody I think should be paying attention to estate planning. Can you tell us, in your experience, what are those specific things that you do as far as estate planning goes? And from a soldier's perspective, retired or active, why is that important to them?
Sure. And so let's start with the basics. Okay, the basics are going to be your last will and testament, and that we all know what that is. Is when you pass away, where does your stuff go? Okay, for the reason that's incredibly important is we have a lot of blended families now, right? People get married, they have children, they get divorced, they get remarried, they have more children, right? If you don't have a will in place, you've heard the expression, the state has one for you, and that may not be at all what you want, okay?
Yeah.
Because it can, you pass away and your spouse is thinking, oh, this house is all mine, and the answer is no, it's not. In fact, the children from the prior marriage now own half the house. Okay, and so that's why it's important to have a will in place, because it outlines exactly what your intentions are. It's where you want your property to be disposed. The
Yep.
other documents are what I call the in between documents. Okay, you're not dead, but you're not exactly here. Okay, the where your power of attorney kicks in, and specifically a durable power of attorney, and that says, hey, in the event I can't make a financial decision or a business decision, I'm designating my spouse to do it for me, and always have an alternate just in case, because husbands and wives tend to travel together, so you want to have a backup, okay, just in case there's an accident.
Yep.
The next one is obviously a medical power of attorney. So, in the event you are unable to make a healthcare decision, you designate your spouse to do it for you, and then you could have an alternate as well. And after that, then we can start getting into the world of, do we want to deal with probate or not probate? Okay, so probate is the process, and when you've passed away, a court has to approve your will in order for your executor to be in charge and then transfer the property. But you have to go through the court process.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. So a
Yeah.
will is a blank piece of paper until the judge says this is an official will. There are shortcuts though. Okay. So there are a couple paths. One is, we call it the poor man's estate planning. Okay. And I use the word poor with air quotes around it. You don't have to be poor to do this.
Yeah.
Number one is make sure every single bank account, financial instrument, stock, life insurance, you name it, has a living person as a beneficiary. Okay.
Okay.
In Texas, that's called a contract on money. That does not go through probate. It has nothing to do with the probate court. You pass away, your beneficiary literally walks in with your death certificate and their driver's license, and they get a check from the bank, period.
Wow.
The other thing you can do is what's called a TOD, a transfer on death deed. So you can put your house into a TOD that says, hey, as long as I'm alive, this is my house, I'm in charge. But when I die, it automatically goes to the following beneficiary, or plural beneficiaries, right? Again, nothing to do with probate. Don't need a court. It automatically passes to those beneficiaries.
Yeah.
And so that's the poor man's version of how to do an estate plan without having to deal with lawyers and going to court. What we do with our veterans, however, is a little different program. You've all heard the term trust, correct?
Yep.
And so they're in trusts are like Skittles. We got all different kinds of flavors and colors. But the main ones that you will see is what's called a revocable living trust. Okay. So while you're alive, you're in charge of all of your assets. When you pass away, while you have passed away, the trust itself has not died. A new trustee steps in. It's kind of like if you're in charge of Coca-Cola, the CEO dies. Well, Coca-Cola is still there. They just put a
Yep.
new CEO in place. Okay. Well, that doesn't require a probate. A new trustee doesn't require court approval. You've already designated who that is. Okay. That's how the trust works. With
Learning.
Smart.
veterans, what we do is what's called an irrevocable trust. So revocable, you're in charge. You can do whatever you want with it. You can actually destroy it. You can revoke it. An irrevocable trust, however, is where you move an asset into a trust and then you say you're not in charge of it. You designate a friend. It can't be a spouse. So you designate a friend. It could be a child or an adult child, and they are now in charge of that asset. And according to the federal rules, so long as you are not in charge, okay, and you don't have a say so, that asset is no longer on your ledger. So remember
Yeah.
earlier we talked about, hey, you got to have that annual below $150,000 of annual income. Well, one of the things we can do is we can rearrange your estate to get you below that number. Now, for the longest time, we didn't have any look back period. They did change the law a few years ago that now there's a 3-year look back period on that, which is why I tell everybody better to set things up in place now while we're a little
Yep.
younger, while our minds are good and whatnot, so we can so later down the road, when the time comes, you've already exhausted that 3-year look back period.
So long story short, excuse me, long story short, I need to get in touch with you because after all the TBIs I've had, I'm going to lose my faculties here in the next like 10,
Who
15
I am.
years. Yeah. Well, that's huge. I didn't, there's a lot of learning, and I love the fact that we have this forum because we can ask specific questions, and at the same time as our audience is learning, we're learning as well. And I really do, before I forget, what I'm not particularly good at is expressing gratitude. And I do want to say before we end the episode that I'm really glad that you took the time away from your family, the things that you've got going on, to get on this episode with us and to speak to the audience about some things that really do have heavy impacts in their lives, no matter who it is. I think, as it relates to San Antonio, like you were talking about, I would say the things that we're talking about is probably reaching about 80% of the population.
Sure. And Steve, I had to tell you, thank you, and believe me when I say thank you guys for your services and what you've done to help protect our country. Because without you, we're nothing. Okay, that the people is it's hard because people don't give the military the credit that it's due. People take they don't. I guess they don't realize that the freedoms that we enjoy every day, going to the grocery store, getting gasoline in our car, the majority of the world doesn't get to enjoy any of that. Okay. While we argue about what type of emissions our vehicles should have, other parts of the world don't even have vehicles. Okay. And so we're very thankful for everything you guys have done. I know what you all have seen has been extremely difficult in your experiences, and we're glad that you're back home safe with your families, and we're happy to help you guys in any way that we can.
Absolutely. And like you just mentioned, since Amber was the one that went to Djibouti, I've never been to Africa. Amber was the one that went to Djibouti. I think it's only appropriate that I think you had one last question for Alex, and that qualifies you for the last question, babe. Go ahead.
Okay, last question, Alex. So I'm sure that with you doing this and with the services that you've provided and that you are providing to our military community, a lot of reason that you're doing it is because of the fulfillment of being able to help, right? You've talked about that.
Yes.
So if there was one story that really sticks out in your mind of how you've been able to help a veteran in our community, what would that one story be to leave our audience with?
Oh, geez.
And it's all good.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Take a second to think about it. It's all good. I know that's a loaded question.
I think I think one of the hard ones that I've had to do was a veteran that basically lost his mental facilities, and this, bear in mind, this took years, but the family fighting over who's to be in charge, and it was horrible. And eventually, we were able to get control of his estate, get control, be able to help him in his final years, so to speak. Okay. And that it was satisfying to be able to get that justice for him while everybody else was fighting just for the sake of fighting. They didn't really care what happened to him. And it's very heartbreaking to see that in other human beings.
Yeah.
But the life lesson learned in that is, had he had the paperwork done in full the first time, while he had control of his mind, we wouldn't have had any of the problems that occurred. And so if I leave the audience with anything, I would say that remember when Noah built the ark, it was before the storm. So do these things now while you're in control. Don't wait until it's too late.
Absolutely. And me personally, without trying to just put you on a platform, just in the short time that I've known you in particular, I can think of no other better estate planner or attorney that I could possibly send people to, which is exactly why I sent my best friend, my best man at my wedding. I had him reach out to you because his particular case, without going into any other details, is he's looking to go from 90 to 100% with a VA rating, so that way he can spend more time with his family. Because I think, and I think we would all agree, that's what it's about. Is we've spent so much time serving the military, serving in the military, serving the American public, and sacrificing, whether it's parts of our body, whether it's parts of our mind, or otherwise. There are innumerable sacrifices that we have all given freely, I'll mention, in service to this country. But the only thing I think a lot of us really want is more time with our loved ones, more time with our family, more time with our kids. You know, I particularly, and I think you might agree with me, Alex, you know, I would rather be the primary influencer in our kids' lives.
Sure.
Whether, you know, and this is not to take away from caretakers or anybody, you know, don't get me wrong. But what do we do? Why do we serve our country? It's not necessarily for selfish reasons. You know, we all freely raise our right hand and we take that oath, the oath of enlistment. You know, we all serve in some capacity. We all try to give our best to our country because we all know that freedom isn't free. And which is why, you know, I say that to then bring it back to what you're doing, Alex, which is why we have so much respect for what you do. Because I would say, you know, a lot of times I think we're not willing to, whether we don't know how or whether we just don't have the emotional or mental bandwidth to stand up and advocate for ourselves. So I'm glad that you're able to step in and provide a gap stop for people that are really, frankly, just like myself. Like, I didn't want to do a VA claim.
Yeah.
You know, until I got around the right kind of folks.
Kicking and screaming to get his VA claimed.
Good for you. Good job.
Exactly.
Good. Well,
exactly.
and I want to circle back. You know, I've never met a person in their end stage of life that said, "Gee, I wish I worked more." Right? Everybody wishes they had more time with their loved ones. And you know, I know the migraine that the VA is. I know it can seem monumental, but I assure you, there's a process. Just have patience, and we can work through it together. Okay, you are not alone in any of this.
Exactly. Which is why, again, I respect what you do. Thank you again for being willing to share your experience. I'm sure, you know, that the intent of this episode is if this can help one person realize that, hey, I got to get out there. I've got to do this. I've got to reach out to Alex. I've got to, you know, send a message to us on YouTube, no matter what it is. If one person can make the decision for their family and for themselves to action whatever it is we talked about on this episode or any of the episodes that we've done so far, I think we're doing the right thing.
Outstanding. Absolutely. Thank you for having me, guys.
Yes, thank you for joining us, Alex, and thank you for what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Appreciate. Thank you for your service.
Absolutely. All right, here we go.
Appreciate you.
On the next episode, remember, give us a like. This was a good one. It was a little bit emotionally charged, I'm not going to lie, because this hit home, and I'm sure for a lot of people. So go ahead and hit that like button. Send us a subscribe. Check the show notes for all the links that we've got. Well, Alex, we're going to link your law firm in the show notes and in the description. So go ahead and check those out. And until next time, here is to your military success.